I absolutely dread the moment when we start off with the decorations, the advertising, the junk mail. It's interesting to me that last week there was a shredder in church. A couple of years ago, I used a shredder around about this time of year and got people to bring their Christmas junk mail with them to church, and we shredded it as an act of disobedience and defiance against the rubbish that's being peddled and the nonsense that we're being asked to take part in at this time of the year. Am I right in thinking that it gets earlier every year? Yes, a sea of nods. Yeah. October, if you please. Shops putting Christmas decorations up. It is truly unbelievable. So I rebel. I become a Grinch, and I don't take part. And I'm terrible to live with. I paid a price for going to the mall on Friday. The incessant Christmas music. And it wasn't even good Christmas music. Well, I've got that out of my system. So today's sermon. This thinking, it's all coming to the surface for me because we are fast approaching the end of the year. And it's never the sort of thing that you want to say. It gets anxiety levels to rise almost immediately. You start mentioning, end of the year, and people start getting a bit tense. Well, that was loud, wasn't it? Tense. That's better. But there is someone in our household who knows how many days there are until Christmas, how many shopping days, and how many options there are out there left for us. Can anyone tell us how many shopping days there are until Christmas? No one's going to admit to it? Good. That's good. Nobody here is hostage to the culture. That's so good to know. Anyway, I wonder what sort of a year it has been. What have been the good and the bad and the ugly of 2008? Next week we have a guest preacher at our youth pastor's induction, and then straight after that we're into Advent, and then on it goes to Christmas. So today is my last opportunity, in a way, to look back and just have we think about 2008 and what was. I wonder what you would say about 2008. It is strange what can come to the surface in times like this. Each one of us have certain images and experiences that are coming into our thinking as we think about 2008. I could talk about starting a new job, feeling like I've been in a whirlwind, moving into a new church family, shifting house, acclimatising to the heat. But no, there is one thing that stands out for me when I think of 2008. I sat down and started mulling it over, and there was one really strong thing that came to the surface for me as I thought about 2008. I hope this doesn't sound too morbid, but it was death. It's not meant to be morbid. I think of death in relation to these things. I've conducted or taken part in 5 funerals here at Oxford Terrace in the portion of this year that I've been the minister here. I did about 10 in 11 years in Greymouth. I've done 5 here this year. Shirley Hamilton, Bruce McKenzie, Betty Rawstrom, Dwayne Toyer, and Ray Ragg. They have each been a real privilege to be a part of. People tell such remarkable stories of the work of God around a funeral. We get these beautiful cameos with folk. The creative work of God in someone's life as the stories are told about who they were and what they did and the way God had worked in them. Stories of brokenness sometimes, or a dawning growth into accepting the gracious touch of God. Each one of those folk had a part of their story connected with this church family, and we miss them, and we acknowledge that now they rest in the arms of Jesus. But as a country, 2008 has been a very significant thing with the death of Christian people this year. And it is this that's also been in my thinking as I consider the question, what has this year been like? As we look a bit wider, there have been two events. The 9 who died in the drownings at Mangatapopo, all Christians who with their teacher, Tony McLean, the son of a Baptist pastor from Auckland, John McLean, and then there was the one in the central concrete of Auckland, Austin Hemmings, his name, as he stepped in to save the life of a young woman. He also the son of a Baptist pastor, as it happens. On just this last Friday, there was a ceremony of cleansing that took place in the plaza where his blood was spilt. Our nation has been deeply touched by those two death events. Most of us sitting here today can recall the situations pretty clearly. We can remember the stories. The media in New Zealand paid close attention to the way these dramas unfolded. And what we had was a nation observing how Christians deal with tragedy. And so one of the overwhelming impressions we were left with was that of forgiveness. And one of the overwhelming impressions we were left with was that of not being simplistic in facing and in comprehending a sad and tragic event. There were no trite one-liners being bandied about as Christians dealt with this difficult situation. I was deeply struck by that absence of silly one-liners. People weren't trotting them out, and that was good. These were people who had a faith that actually worked on the ground, if we can put it like that. There was the Christian community gathering in their family as they mourned. We saw it on the national television. There was the vital expression of faith in God when things are going badly, not just when things are going well. There was a very real thread of hope in amongst the tears. Austin Hemmings' wife, now a widow, asking people who were watching on to contact her, to express how they will be changed because of what he did and the way they live their life because of what Austin Hemmings was prepared to die for. The Elam Christian School funerals, where tears were mixed with the very real expectation that death is not the final curtain, and that for the follower of Jesus, we trust in God's ultimate provision because of the work of Jesus Christ. And if Paul Holmes was having his end-of-year party on the roof of TVNZ like he used to, then in amongst the celebrity trivia that usually makes for good television, there would probably be a couple of references to these big events that happened in our nation this year as Christians dealt with tragedy. Shortly we will be into the season of Advent. Advent is a fabulous time for those of us who refuse to be sucked in by the machine. I might have mentioned that earlier in the sermon, did I? I think I did. Advent's a fabulous time. Advent is underscored by some glorious words. One of them is hope. And when I think of the way that death has been handled this year, 5 times in our church family and twice in nationally significant situations, then this word, hope, comes to the surface. Not wishful thinking, not wistful longing based on nothing more than, sentiment. Actually something quite substantial that works when Christian folk are having difficult moments. Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 to 7, which we had read just a moment ago, is one of my favourites. I guess I should put up right here and now my bias. I love this particular passage of Scripture. It's a classic. I love it. It brings some framework to hope. It allows us to put some meat on the bones of this grand Christian concept. It is full of a series of no mores. There are a list of no mores that get mentioned in this passage. It defines the future for us by pointing out what will be absent in that time. And it is a good list of absences. It causes our hearts to warm at the reminder that God is in the business of provision for those who face death trusting in Jesus. So there's a list of no mores. No more sea or ocean. No more tears, no more death, no more mourning, no crying, no pain. All of the signs and trappings and unavoidable attachments that are associated with our human condition, the ones we struggle with the most deeply, all dealt with. The tears and the death and the mourning and the crying and the pain, we can appreciate how vital it is that they be dealt with ultimately. But the first one, no more sea, it's sort of, on an initial reading, it seems a bit random that all these terrible things are being dealt with, but the ocean's being dealt with as well. What's that about? And it seems a bit odd. With Revelation, we get onto shaky ground when we start taking it too literally. And this is one of those times when it's interesting to ask what is behind the reason for this one being there. No more sea. There being no sea makes sense when we realise that in those times, people viewed the sea, the ocean, as being a dark and malevolent, turbulent domain that was unable to be fully comprehended. It was so big and vast, and frankly, it was scary. We can relate to that if we've ever been out in a small boat and ended up in a bit of a chop. It can be a scary thing, the sea. And in those times, the thought was that in the depths of the ocean, that's where evil was. That was the home of Satan, unable to be tamed and scary. So we are being told here the grandest of news. That not that the sea has been eliminated, but that the lair of the devil, his abode, it is gone. He no longer has a place. He has been beaten. And then we turn it on its head and we ask, what is present in this passage? The dwelling place of God will be with us. There will be no more separation for the bride and the groom. At last, all will be one. God's plan for the redemption of all things will be complete. And the tears will be wiped away. Not by mum or not by someone who's close to us, but actually by God. That is how close things will be. And finally, the ultimate expression of satisfaction for weary travellers is offered. Thirst-quenching water, life-giving water. Austin Hemmings and Tony McLean, they knew what this was all about. And so they did not hesitate when confronted with exceptionally tough choices. In their deaths, they have left a testimony of hope. And a lot of people have sat back and reflected because of the way they testified to Christ in their death. Here's a story. I don't know if this story is true or not. I don't know if it is accurate to the original version. But here it is. There was a lady. Let's call her Mrs. Brown. She was the camp cook at one of these big Christian camps they have in the USA. She was a very, very good cook, and she was well loved. She had a good sense of humour, Mrs. Brown, and the kids all loved going to the camps where she was the cook. And they were very happy to get into the kitchen and do jobs for her, doing dishes and duties and so forth. She was one of life's gems. She had a few sayings that she was known for, and also a few dishes that she was extra good at preparing. And the children would ask for these dishes because they were so awesome. One of them was a cheesecake, sort of a dessert, and she had a saying that went with it, her best known saying. And they would all know what it meant when she came out with it. The saying was, "Hold on to your forks, because the best is yet to come." And when she'd say that, "Hold on to your forks, the best is yet to come," everyone would know, as they gathered up the dirty plates, to hold on to their forks, because it was cheesecake time, and there was going to be an awesome dessert. Anyway, the years went by, and Mrs. Brown, she got older, and she eventually had to stop cooking. But she stayed in touch with a lot of the children as they grew up. She was that type of person, and she was well loved and reasonably well known. And some of these ones had even started sending their own kids off to the same camps. But in the end, she died. The word got out, and a lot of the people who had been through her camp kitchen made a point of attending her funeral. And it was a very big funeral. It was one of those ones where they bring in the casket after everyone has gathered. And as they brought the casket in, people were greeted with an amazing sight. On top of the coffin was sitting a fork. And from beyond her death, she was sending them a message. Hold on, because the best is yet to come. What a great story of someone who knew where she was going and knew deep in her heart that death is not the final curtain, that for those who love Jesus, the best is yet to come. You may think of this year that was, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. You may think of this year and it is mainly tears or pain. It may be dominated by death of one sort or another. We together thank God for the gift of hope that Revelation is absolutely laden with. A special message from God to people such as us, that as we reflect on what has been, and as we turn to looking ahead, not totally certain of what is coming before our death, but offering to God our imaginations, seeking to be pilgrims who anticipate that great day when God's home is with mankind. when he will live with them and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more grief, or crying, or pain. The old things will have disappeared.